When you see videos of me interacting with the text and with other people who are interacting with the text in our X text Y, you'll see that there's a wide variety of respondents, of dialogic partners. Sometimes they're students, or as I like to call them, fellow learners. But let's, for the sake of the argument, call them students in a classroom. Sometimes they're graduate students who are already professors in the making. Sometimes they are high school students. Sometimes they're children, I hope. And the whole point is to have an intergenerational model of learning. If I, as a professor in my golden years, if I assume the position of being the talking head who is going to mediate all of Greek civilization, I have failed, because the important thing is, and this is what Socrates teaches us, in Platonic dialogues where Plato stages Socrates, or may I put it this way, animates Socrates to talk with students, the Socratic ideal is to pass the word on and to have questions and answers. Let's call it dialogue. Extend from one situation to another, from one culture to another, and certainly from one generation to the next. And that's what we try to sort of put into action in our presentations of our close readings to the world out there, which is a diverse world with which we want to engage, with which we want to achieve an intimacy through an active reading of the text. But if it's just one interpreter of the text, that's not good enough for me. I certainly give everybody out there my own take on how I do a close reading of a given text. And after all, there's a 0 hour where we have 8 texts, and then there's hours 1 through 24 where we have roughly 200 texts. I stopped counting, but roughly 200. And each one of those 200 texts I engage with, and I try to show by example how one person does a close reading, somebody who spent all his life with this. But the whole idea is that's not enough. The book, the e-book or the printed version of the book, those various instantiations of my close readings are not enough for me. If I can't pass on the skill of close reading to my graduate students primarily, but also to my students in general, or as I like to call them, my fellow learners, then I haven't succeeded. So that's why, in a small way, in a microcosm, the various interactions we have, whether we call them dialogues or conversations with dialogic partners, I like that term, those interactions are meant to show everybody out there that there's so many ways of reading, not just alone, but reading together, because this is community building. These are the most important values in life. I wouldn't have been studying these things for all my life if I didn't think they give meaning to life in a very focused Greek culture way, but where Greek culture is trying to be universal. Greek culture is trying to speak to other cultures, and the ones I have especially in mind are Chinese cultures. And I'm using Chinese in the broadest sense of all the interesting cultural diversity in China. Similarly with India, and the list goes on. And Native American cultures, think of the variety and think of how those cultures are threatened in their very existence. So I'm talking about all these different cultures, and I suppose it's because basically I was trained to be a linguist, and linguists are supposed to understand and appreciate the diversity of humanity. That if there's one thing you can universalize about humans in their cultures is that they're diverse. That's the beauty of it. When you think about Plato's Phaedo, for example, that amazing dialogue about the last hours of Socrates, what Socrates is saying about the written text is that it's potentially dead if it can't engage with the living, with those who come in contact with this text by way of reading it, which is one way of simulating having a dialogue with Socrates himself. And that sense of a book that has to keep coming alive by way of engagement with its contents is not just a philosophical construct of Plato as he reconstructs Socrates and the life of Socrates and his relations with his students. No, it's a model that applies to all Greek civilization. And it's no accident that Socrates is usually open-ended in his interactions with his students. It's not that Socrates solves everything for us when he interacts with his students and then we read that interaction in our text. He's always leaving the door wide open for further dialogue. A fancy word for it is that Socratic method is aporetic. It leaves stumbling blocks and it leaves challenges for the next iteration of a dialogue. And Socrates himself sometimes catches himself as Plato represents him and saying, "Uh-oh, I just talked like a book here. So let's somehow get that activated and let's get a response, because otherwise the word will die again." The written word in this scenario, and it's shown beautifully in a dialogue we don't read in this project, which is the Phaedrus, but the idea is that the written word has the potential of just dying on you. And so even when Socrates dies, he says, if you're sorry for me, if you're crying about my dying, cry about me only if the word dies on us. And in the original Greek, it's almost like that. The way I just translated it, dies on us. So we call it an ethical dative. And cry if the word dies on us, but if the word lives by being constantly re-engaged with, then the vitality of these things that mean more than anything to humans, or should, can go on. And it's intergenerational, it's intercultural, and best of all, it's potentially eternal.